this is the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm your co-host, Coach Red Pill. I'm joined by Dr. Benway, and today we're going to do something different. We're going to be doing a three-part series on New Hollywood, the films of New Hollywood, and it's a pretty exciting little thing that we're doing. We're going to be releasing them on 3 consecutive days, or 3 consecutive episodes, rather, and we hope that you enjoy them. And so to start it off, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Benway, and he's going to give us a précis about New Hollywood. So take it away, Dr. Benway.
Sure thing. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I've been having versions of this conversation in my mind for years.
I know.
Sometimes to people listening.
Yeah.
So why do I like New Hollywood? Well, invariably, like, it has a wonderful cocktail, to put it in a crude way, of all sorts of things that I enjoy. Specifically, the idea of, films done cheap, in some cases cheaply on the fly, and with, like, I don't give a fuck, what conventions or rules I'm following. We're experimenting here attitude. On the other, on another level, there's an attitude of, you know what, I'm just going to openly and unapologetically depict all sorts of moral confusion, political confusion, tits and ass, and foul language all together. And there's going to be something compelling about that.
Yeah,
I know that sounds admittedly crude, but there's a good element.
What I liked about the New Hollywood is that there's, on the one hand, the desire to pander to an audience by showing pretty naked girls and using foul language, and on the other hand, there's the urge to talk about relatively serious things and depict things that are relatively serious, or things that had never been shown before. I mean, because a lot of New Hollywood was based on new technology, the ability to have small, lightweight cameras and lightweight sound recording equipment that you could take out into actual practical locations and shoot stuff. And so it was interesting. There's that conundrum of, like, being cutting edge and at the same time being Carnival Barker kind of thing.
Right, and there's a kind of economic reason why this sort of thing happened. And I agree. Ironically enough, the desire to make very cheap movies that low risk, like, I spend a couple $1 million on it, and hey, if 1 out of 50 makes a few $100 million or even just tens of millions of dollars, hey, investment justified.
Not even that. It was like a couple of $100. I mean, Easy Rider was made for $75,000, I think.
Or is something very minimal.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, you could just spread your bets in a wide kind of way. It's like, here, just let these inmates do what their thing is. Right. Ironically enough, that gives you the freedom to take yourself more seriously, because you don't have the burden of seriously worrying about, hey, this is a $300 million movie, don't fuck it up.
Yeah, totally. Because you can afford to do a film about something that interests you, as opposed to what you think will interest the audience, and that makes it automatically much more personal. Yeah, because before let's not talk about $300 million pictures. Before this, what were they doing? They were doing musicals and Sands and Sandals epics, and the failures of those is why we got New Hollywood, right?
Right, and even in those, like Hollywood's period. So, like, you go back to the 60s, or let's say late 50s through the 60s, in an effort to compete with television, which was basically crude, low resolution, but immediate. And you didn't have to leave your fucking house for it. The theaters or the studios were always like, big is better, widescreen, big productions, thousands of actors.
Spectacle.
And some of those spectacles are frankly amazing and deserving of it. Ben-Hur, Lawrence of Arabia primarily,
sure.
Dr. Zhivago, those are early 60s doing very well.
How the West was won. How the West was won, for example. Great pictures.
Yeah, and exactly. And as the decade goes by, and you know how Hollywood is, it's like, well, it succeeded once, which means it will succeed infinitely more times. So basically you get to, so for the Sword and Sandals epic, even though I don't think it's a bad picture, you have a movie, Cleopatra, which is about Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, who was fucking and not fucking.
Talk about cultural appropriation. Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra. Oh, yeah. How would that have flown today, I ask?
Exactly, because Elizabeth Taylor isn't even Greek.
Yeah, I mean, a blue-eyed, girl of English descent playing Cleopatra. Oh man, I mean, like the cultural warriors would have been up in arms. They would have shot her. They would have just
Well,
gone up to her and shot her.
well, strap your boots in and call me Susan, because like the whole Hollywood culture at that time was appropriation, and no one gave a fucking shit.
Yeah,
But the funny thing is that big epic, which isn't a bad movie, was basically almost bankrupted a studio. 20th Century Fox, I believe, was the studio,
yeah,
and that was one of the things. It just kept getting bigger and bigger, cost more money. They literally had to shut down the studio, stop doing payroll, and pray to God that the movie returned enough money so they could turn the lights back on.
yeah.
That's how kind of fucked up it got.
No, it was
And there were
foolish of them.
other,
It
yeah,
was
go ahead.
incredibly foolish. No, no, that's what happened. You see, and we're saying it now, which is why it's interesting, because I think that you and I both suspect that we're about to go into a new Hollywood type situation, or we might be having one now. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the thing that was interesting was that, see, all of these swords and sandals epics, see, and all the big musicals. The big musicals started with The Sound of Music and. Mary Poppins and My Fair Lady, and well, My Fair Lady was a hit or not? No, it was a hit.
My Fair Lady was a hit, and it won Best Picture and a whole bunch of other awards. Ironically enough, it was the movie which beat Doctor Strangelove for Best Picture of the year, which always amuses me.
Ah, well, but Doctor Strangelove was a hard picture to take. Okay, I mean, at the time, I could see that people would have been like, I don't know, you know. But anyway, these big spectacle pictures had been growing during the 50s because of TV, because TV was, an image in every living room, and television had been draining box office receipts in a catastrophic way. And also, something else that people don't seem to notice was that what was it, in 48 was when the Supreme Court handed down the decision to break up the studio's vertical monopoly on theaters.
I don't remember the year, but I know it was post-war and pretty soon after the
Yeah,
war.
I do suspect it was 48. I forget the name of the decision. I should have prepped for it. But anyway, I think that cut down revenue on the studios quite a bit. And because what had happened before was the studio had produced its own pictures and distributed its own pictures to the theaters that it itself owned. And so there'd be one theater that was the Paramount Theater, and they were called the Paramount Theater and the MGM Theater. That's where the name came from. I mean, today we have some that are still hanging around with those names, but it's because of that, because they were owned by the studio, and so the theater would only play the studio's pictures, and the studios also. They did newsreels. They did a whole bunch of other stuff. It wasn't just movies. Movies were the feature, the main feature, but they had newsreels. They had cartoons. They had all the rest of it. And what happened was that, see, when that decision came down and then TV happened, the studios lost a lot of revenue. And so to make up for that revenue, they discovered these big epics, because with a bigger screens than the TV screen, they could take advantage of it and make these big pictures. And they started pushing the exhibitors, because they no longer owned the theaters. They started pushing the theaters, the exhibitors, to have bigger screens, to have bigger Technicolor stuff, right? So they could project these big images, and what happened because of it? They went on, whole hog on the big movies, the big spectacle pictures, until they overdid it.
And here's what's interesting about them doing it and the time they overdid it, right? Because the formula they were using in the late 60s and mid 60s was still the formula that 5 years later was successful. Here's the big thing that happened, and it's related to the fact that, bigger, more risky budgets and whatnot. Those movies really didn't do anything in a compelling way to address the big elephant in the room that no one was talking about, which was the not just hippie movement, but the counterculture, the anti-war sentiment, whatever political minded things you had. Those were too risky. Only one guy was kind of doing it and willing to take the risk. And the main reason he was doing that is because he was willing to do it fucking cheap. And that was Roger Corman.
Right.
For those of you who don't know, Roger Corman is the king of the B movies. Basically, the joke about Roger Corman is like he would basically come up with the idea to film a movie over like a lunch that was delayed, and then would film it that afternoon, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Literally as cheap as possible. But he basically said as quickly as possible. And in his only rule to the young kids who came to him to get a job in the business, which was basically, yeah, I'll let you do whatever you want as long as you don't lose money.
Yeah. Did you know that he went to MIT?
I did.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Because most people think that he's just a schlockmeister. Like, what was the name of the guy who was into the titty pictures? The one where all the girls had enormous breasts.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or Ed
Oh
Wood. They all.
shit! Why do
Yeah,
I?
yeah.
No,
But Corman was. He's still alive. I do hope. But he was a fucking brilliant guy.
Corman is still alive. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but he was like a smart customer. I mean, he was nobody's fool. And the fact that here's something else that's really interesting. See, I'm looking at his bio now as you're speaking, right? He was born in 26, right? So
Hmm.
he was basically what? He was in his 30s during the 50s when he started the studio. He was a young kid.
Hmm.
He was a really young kid. And yeah, all he cared about was just making money. If it's making money, good. If it's not, fuck it. You know?
And for those of you, he did direct films himself, and those of you, the biggest films you'll probably remember of his are his, you know,
Death Race
adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe.
2000. Death Race
Death
2000.
Race 2000. Did he direct Death Race? I thought he
No,
just produced it.
I think he just produced it. But God, Death Race 2000 was
Starring Sylvester Stallone, David Carradine. It's a good one. It's a little bit later than our period, so I will go back to it. But it's a great little,
yeah.
wonderful schlock movie where literally cars are racing and they get points for killing people.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful movie.
It's just a wonderful
Fun for the
movie.
whole fucking family.
Fun for the whole family, and they should fucking do it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they should do it for real. We have reality TV. We have the morons out there on the streets. Let's make it happen. I mean, America, come on, let's make it happen. Death Race, 2020, yay. Okay, anyway.
But by and large, when he was directing in the 60s, he's mostly famous for his adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe starring Vincent Price. So
Yeah,
one of the better ones was like The
yeah.
Mask of the Red Death.
Yeah, and the reason was that it was publicly available, because it was that cheap, You didn't even want to pay the fucking writers, for crying out loud. Oh, man.
Exactly. But the funny thing with a guy like that is, he's willing to take a risk. And if you look at his stable of students who went through, as they called it in retrospect, the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking, with a lot of respect, it was your big deal guys from this period. It's Peter Bogdanovich, Dennis Hopper, Jack Nicholson, Peter Fonda, Martin Scorsese, I think Coppola as well.
Yes, Coppola. Yeah.
They all basically were
James
there.
James Cameron.
Yep.
He started as a assistant prop, I think, in Roger Corman picture. Yeah, and he rose quickly to art director.
It's the same idea.
Yeah. I mean, what's his name? Ron Howard. Ron Howard got his
exactly.
first
Actually, Ron Howard, I think. Did Ron Howard actually direct Death Race 2000? I think he was the one.
No. I'm going to look it up. Death Race 2000. I remember watching that. I thought, man, that is a shitty picture. Paul Bartel. I don't know who Paul.
Oh, Paul Bartel. I'm sorry. I like Paul Bartel.
What movies did he do?
Eating Raoul. Yeah, Paul Bartel is he's kind of like a fussy, bald guy who makes these interesting political satire movies. Eating Raoul is a movie in the early 80s about a couple who has high class taste. They want to open a restaurant. They can't get a loan from the bank. They accidentally kill someone who the wife was doing a trick, for in order to get money. So they said, "Oh, let's just cook him, and we'll make money off of that." And everybody loves their cooking, so they have to go around killing all the sort of slimy, pimpy, greasy, underground, sexy people in LA to feed their restaurant. It's a wonderful picture, fun for the whole family. Let me tell you.
Which picture is this one?
Eating Raoul.
Oh.
Ironically enough, Raoul, the actor who plays Raoul is Robert Bertrand, who was Chakotay in Star Trek Voyager. So now my full nerddom has come around.
Yes, it has. Oh man, yeah. But it's really funny because he directed scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills in the late '80s comedy that was actually kind of. I remember it as being good, but I actually saw it back in '89. My tastes have changed radically since then. But yeah, anyway, what's interesting, all these people got their start. I mean, seeing the first Sylvester Stallone pictures, or better yet, the first Jack Nicholson performance in a Roger Corman picture. That's fucking wild, I mean, he was just so pathetic,
And here's what's wild about that. Everybody wasn't just doing one thing. Jack was a writer.
Yeah.
To start with, and actually was a pretty decent one.
Yeah.
And also, you were expected to know a bunch of different things. Like, there's a good story I heard from Peter Bogdanovich where I guess Roger Corman shows up in whatever room he was in and says, "Peter, I saw your movie. It doesn't cut well." And Peter says, "What do you mean it doesn't cut well?" And he says, "Well, let me show you." And Peter says, "Well, you cut it wrong." He says, "What do you mean you cut it wrong? Go cut it yourself if you think it's wrong." He says, Peter says, I don't know how to cut a film. He says, what the fuck do you mean you don't know how to cut a film? Dennis, meaning Dennis Hopper. Dennis, tell Peter how to cut the film. And, Peter Bogdanovich became an editor being taught by Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
That was the kind of attitude, just to get it fucking done. And
Yeah.
and that, frankly, served them well.
Yes,
because
it did.
that, facility with all of the technical matters, that cheap school mentality coupled with, for this early generation, because they're, let's say, about 5 years to 10 years older than the baby boomers, they're coupled with a love for and desire to reproduce some of the art house European films from the early 60s.
Yeah.
Thinking like Jean-Luc Godard, Ingmar Bergman, Tarkovsky to some extent. All of those kind of guys are in their mind. So like, we have the high taste, but we're going to like the fucking underground school filmmaking, learn how to do it as you go.
Yeah, but
attitude.
that's how all of the new Hollywood cinema, the early ones, okay, they all had that thing on the one hand of exploitation pictures that were designed to get ass in seats, and on the other hand, the highfalutin artistic ambitions and thematic ambitions. And I think that juxtaposition was what made early new Hollywood pictures so goddamn interesting. Because it really was that juxtaposition of just cheap ass shit, exploitation, Roger Corman crap, and trying to be Godard and new wave cinema and shit.
It's like titties in prison, but with like philosophical underpinnings.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of and I'm like, I'm not even exaggerating this. This is literally the kind of movies you get. Like one of the early movies, it's even earlier than Easy Rider, which is going to be the big movie to talk about it right now. But earlier than Easy Rider, Peter Bogdanovich made a movie called Targets, which was, I think, based off of the Texas A&M shooting. So those of you who may remember.
Wait, no, yeah, the Texas University.
Texas University, sorry. In the mid 60s, a former Marine veteran, I think, who's for whatever reason snapped.
No, yeah, this was before Vietnam. He was like 61, I think, or 62.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was before Vietnam. So Vietnam didn't play anything in it. Yeah, he was
Charles
Starkweather. Charles Starkweather. Yeah, I think everybody knows. So yeah.
Peter Bogdanovich basically makes a movie more or less that, like, a nice clean cut American guy gets a gun and just starts randomly shooting people.
Yeah,
and I think the schlocky portion of it is, I think Boris Karloff has a bit part in it for some reason, doing something. And I'm like, that's perfect. That's fucking perfect.
By the way,
Frankenstein's monster himself.
Yeah, but just a quick parenthesis. That kind of man high up in a tower shooting random people. That trope, right? All in the '60s and the '70s. You had, I remember that the 2-minute warning. That was about that. And there were a couple of other pictures like that. You remember?
I don't remember the others, but I'm it may. The thing, I've seen so many of these movies, I probably have seen them, but I can't remember it.
I think there was one called Black Friday that was about the blimp. The Goodyear blimp.
Oh no, yeah, that was later. That was it was like I feel like Black Sunday actually is what it's called.
What was it? And, Black Friday? Yeah, Black Sunday, something like that. Yeah, because it was about a football game and some crazy on the blimp. I think he had a gun, because I don't think that if you crashed a blimp into anybody, I don't think it would do it. It doesn't have the visceral impact of a shooter, But yeah, I remember the 2-minute warning, and those were. It was weird because now that I think about it, they're like schlocky pictures with A-list cast, right? That were basically, copying Roger Corman schlock, and trying to make it serious with all these big name actors.
And what's funny is a lot of the big name actors we think of now from this period were guys who couldn't get a fucking job in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like Bruce Dern and Jack Nicholson. Yeah. And go down the list. Like, I think that Bruce Dern and Jack Nicholson are actually close friends, or at least were at the time. And Bruce Dern would always joke about, how Jack had ambitions of, taking over the town, man. And Bruce Dern was like, "You're the ugliest fuck I've ever seen. No one will hire you for anything."
Yeah.
But Bruce Dern had a great line too, which was, "You know what? We are not the movie star looking beautiful guys, but we're fucking interesting." Those are his exact words. We're fucking interesting.
Because the movie star was Warren Beatty, and he was in the system at the time, and during the '60s, when all these guys were coming up, Bruce Dern and Nicholson and all the rest of them, when they were coming up, Peter Fonda, he had the good looks, and he could have been a leading man. I think that he was the only one who consciously decided that he was going to go this. He was the son of Henry Fonda, who was a major fucking star, and Peter Fonda had good looks. I mean, he looked like a movie star. I think that, back in his day, right, he could have gone toe to toe with Warren Beatty in the looks department. I think that Peter Fonda's career is the only interesting one because he consciously, it seems to me, he consciously decided to go the indie route. And by the way, this is the first indie because everybody else had always been under the aegis of a studio, but it was only because of the deregulation of the exhibitors, whereby they were no longer owned by the studios, that indies could get in. Because see, before, you couldn't have an independent film industry because nobody would show the pictures because all of the movie houses were owned by the studios. And it was only after this decision that you could have independent filmmakers. You could have people like Ed Wood, God help us all. You could have people like Roger Corman and the guy who loved tits. What's his name? Yeah,
Russ something or other.
yeah, exactly. It was only in Russ Meyer.
Russ Meyer.
Yeah.
The main reason I know is because Roger Ebert wrote the screenplay to Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and Russ Meyer's big line was, "I like big bosoms and square jaws."
Yes. Emphasis on the big bosoms.
Ironically enough, Roger Ebert exhibited both of those categories.
That's mean. That's a mean crack, but I think he would have liked it.
It's mean, but perfectly apt. But the other thing, because you're getting at a right point here, because what is the big movie that kind of clicked at this time? There are other interesting movies that preceded, but Easy Rider is the one people cite. But what's interesting about that one is that it was the unison, ironically enough, of the studios and that independent. Because what happened? Columbia Studios basically had a relationship with this little company called BBS, which was led by a guy named Bob Ravelson, a guy named Bert Schneider. I forget the last one. Their identities aren't important, but what is important is this. Columbia said, I'll give you, a little bit of money to make as many, whatever films you want. You can do whatever you want, just as long as you're within budget and you deliver something I can kind of market to a youth culture or what have you. I don't give a shit what you do.
Yeah, because
so out of that comes Easy Rider.
Yeah, because they didn't know how the studios, they were hemorrhaging money. They were hemorrhaging a lot of fucking money. They didn't know how to reach the youth culture, which had been raised on TV. And they didn't know how to reach them, and the big spectacle pictures were bombing. And it was like one bomb after the next, and it was breaking these studios. There was Cleopatra, which ended the Swords and Sandals epics, right? Because there had been a whole bunch of them. I remember watching them growing up. There had been stuff like, I remember my favorite was The Long Ships. That was a great picture. Mm-hmm. With the little bell and all the rest of it. And I forget the other ones. They were all like of a piece.
The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which was an
Spartacus.
Under-remembered one, Spartacus. Ben-Hur is
Ten
like
Commandments.
Really one of the starter.
Yeah, that was like the third version of the Ten Commandments. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that wasn't even the first version of Ben-Hur. There was an earlier
one.
one.
There was an earlier one. Yeah. Well, yeah, because Ben-Hur, the book, had been a huge bestseller back in the day. Yeah. So the sandals, Swords and Sandals epics are bombing. The musicals are bombing. Which was the first big? Well, Paint Your Wagon was a big flop.
So Paint Your Wagon was a bomb, and Dr. Dolittle. Paint Your Wagon is my favorite to mention because you get Clint Eastwood. Dr. Dolittle was a bomb because you got Rex Harrison saying, "I want to talk to the animals." Of course you do, Rex. You want to fuck the animals is what you. I'm kidding because I like Rex Harrison, but
okay.
we all know which end of his toast got buttered.
Oh well.
But needless to say, they bombed. They did not, or at least they underperformed. And they're like, hey, there's a lot of people who have a lot of disposable income who we can't get into the theater. They kind of are bored by us.
Yeah.
So let's have this crazy guy by the name of Dennis Hopper, who looks like he's ready to kill someone at any given point in time. Let's give him a camera and kind of let him wander around Mardi Gras in Louisiana. See what happens. What could happen? What could go wrong? Because he was a lunatic at that time, no doubt about it.
Oh yeah, he was stoned out of his gourd half the time. And the thing is, see, Dennis Hopper had the he was going to be a star. He had been a guy chosen to be a star. He was a good-looking kid back in the day.
Right.
And his looks got ruined. Too much drugs, too much alcohol, too much everything. But he was a part of the system. He had grown up in the system, in the Hollywood system, but that broken out and wound up doing Easy Rider. And so what's interesting to me is what's happening also in television. that to me is really interesting, because TV became not just formulaic but fucking calcified. And I think that that's something that people who talk about new Hollywood don't give enough emphasis on. Because, you see, the 50s TV was really good. It was interesting. There were a lot of stories that were, yeah, they were episodic, but they had moral conundrums.
And it was also like live plays. They were
Yes.
literally when you see people on the in those early days of TV doing these various performances, they were shooting that live and transmitting it
Yeah,
live. And,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was interesting. It was not just the fact that it was a live play, but that the movies, the stories themselves were interesting in the 50s. But it was somehow in the late 50s and the 60s that it became calcified, and the episodes were horrible. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, where you still had that calcified television that was just fucking. It was just so repetitive and unimaginative and just uninteresting stories, and I think
and
that
that's
that's
what's
what movies, that's what new Hollywood started filling in, the lack of interesting stories. Okay, and I'm going to tie this in later because I think that that's what's happening now. I mean, think about it. You have TV today where you have Breaking Bad, you have Westworld. Apparently, the second season seems to be pretty good. I haven't been following it, but that's not the point. It seems that it's interesting TV. It all started with The Sopranos, and it all started because of the business model that these cable providers were not, they didn't care about getting eyeballs on the particular show. What they cared about was making enough noise because of the show so that people would add their channel onto the cable bundle. Okay, that's the reason that AMC backed Mad Men, which was never a big hit insofar as eyeballs, but had a huge and disproportionate cultural impact. And it's because people were like, oh, I want to have AMC because they have Mad Men, so it must be good. And so Mad Men did interesting things. TV back in the day, in the 50s and the 60s, was boring. And that's why, this indie cinema started taking off, and people don't give it enough emphasis.
Well, and here's the thing about Easy Rider that I, will recall. It functions on that level because as a movie compared to the rest of the stuff that was coming out at that time, I don't think it's the best. I don't think it's a 100% great story by any means. It's actually a lot of it is forgettable. But here's what it has going for it. It has. I'm going to be very open about the drug culture. I'm going to let Jack Nicholson do his eccentricities, and I'm going to have him reference D.H. Lawrence and all these other philosophical points. I'm going to have a few good moments of that. And you know what? You're going to see things that, you probably are aware of. You're probably interested. You're watching it on the news. You're listening to this various music. But for whatever reason, you haven't seen it on the big screen. Well, I'm going to put it there.
Yeah, you're gonna
And
see
that
somebody.
makes it
You're gonna see
interesting.
Peter Fonda expertly roll a joint. I don't think they never showed somebody rolling a joint in a movie before. It was fucking
Well,
funny.
to me, like the scene in that movie that I think is the most memorable is like when they get out of some local prison somewhere, and Jack Nicholson is there, and he's like a little, Southern lawyer boy. And he says, "First of the day, fellas, here's to D.H. Lawrence." And he takes a big swig of whiskey and just starts making ridiculous noises. It's like, almost like how if you guys knew Hunter Thompson, what he would do after he snorted some sort of drug, some wild shriek of a noise, and then just pass the time off that. I was like, that kind of weirdo shit is great. You never see weirdo shit in the old Hollywood system,
Oh
with
no,
some
never,
exception.
never, never.
But
Well,
by
you
and
don't see
large,
it now either. You don't see, what's interesting is about movies today and TV too. You do not see any kind of eccentricity, and it's fucking boring. And I think that that's why so many people watch YouTube, frankly, because on YouTube there's nothing but eccentricity and fucking crazy ass shit to boot.
And that's to me why that's the other big piece I do like, and we've hinted at it. It's like that whole excitement over, like I said, the tits, the ass, saying fuck. It isn't just because there's just titillation, although there's a large element of that. It's because it actually is a useful construct to get you paying attention and doing interesting things. Like there's a great movie around this time called The Last Detail. I think it's a
Oh
Hal
yeah,
Ashby movie.
yeah. It is a
And
Hal
there's
Ashby.
this
That's a great picture.
and so basically the premise is Jack Nicholson and another guy are taking Randy Quaid, who they're all like Navy men, and Randy Quaid is getting put into the brig or the prison for some goddamn thing. I don't even
No,
remember.
it
And
was
so they're
something.
going to
I don't recall if it was important or trivial. I honestly have forgotten. But Jack Nicholson and the other guy were military police, and they were taking
exactly.
him to prison, and it was going to be for a
Yeah,
long stretch. And they have
right,
like
exactly.
like a wild time in New York City, and
It,
it's yeah, yeah.
and there's a great scene where they're going to a bar and the bar keeps hassling them, and he's because they're having too much fun, and the barkeep says, don't make me call the shore patrol, and Jack Nicholson pulls out a gun, lays it on the table, and Jack's in full Navy gear and get up. He says, I am the motherfucking shore patrol, motherfucker. I am the motherfucking shore patrol. You're gonna get this motherfucker another fucking drink. And it's like literally like 50 motherfuckers. And this is a script written by a guy named Bob Town. That name will be familiar to you
Yeah,
later. But needless to say, he had a
is it Robert Towney or Town?
Robert Town, not Towney.
Okay, well,
Anyway, and Bob Town had an interesting exchange with the studio at the time. This is when the studio slightly cared. They went to it's like, hey, Bob, do you think 20 motherfuckers would be more impactful than 40 motherfuckers? And Bob's response was, yeah, sure, if the actual swearing was a manifestation of strength. But it's not. It's a manifestation of these guys' impotence. They don't control much of anything, so all they can do is swear. And that kind of intellectual mentality behind it is saying, like, look, all Jack's going to be able to do to prove that he's a man is to just bark like a loud dog, as
right.
opposed to bite, which he can't do. That's actually, there's logic behind that. It
Yeah.
makes sense in the movie. The narrative thrust as to why you're doing that. That's what's so interesting about this period. That it's not just necessarily gratuitous, although it is wonderfully gratuitous on some level. It has a purpose to serve.
Yeah, but what's interesting to me is that there is a okay. Going back, I've been watching a couple of new Hollywood pictures, in preparation for this, and a few scenes that you sent me. And let's talk about one that you sent me, which is the ending of the movie Joe. Joe is what, 71, I think.
70 or 71. I
Yeah.
forget which one.
Okay, so Joe, brief recap. It's about a semi-psycho guy, and at the end of the picture, giving it away here. Spoiler alert. He winds up killing a whole bunch of people. Okay. Now, what I found interesting as a filmmaker, okay, and something that and I negatively compare current filmmaking. Okay. The guy, Peter, is played by Peter Boyle, played rather brilliantly by Peter Boyle, and it was his breakout performance, right? And
Yeah.
Peter Boyle, he is basically a psycho. He goes with an older man, and the two of them, they go into this house that's full of hippies, and they wind up massacring all the hippies. I think that they shoot like 9 hippies or something like that. It's horrible,
They
right?
shoot plenty.
Yeah, I mean, no, at least 9. But the thing is, what's interesting here is that they shoot them. There are no close-ups. Or there are a few close-ups here and there, but for the most part, you have relatively wide-angle shots of the actual killing. Okay, there isn't a directorial emphasis on the action. The action just seems to happen almost spontaneously. There are some close-ups of here and there of like people's reactions after they get shot, but not before. The director's not leading you up to the incident. It's just sort of happening. And I'm mentioning this because I just saw that clip right before we recorded this, because you, Benway, had sent it to me, right? And what happened was that it made me think of all the other stuff in all the other movies of New Hollywood where you don't get the close-up. You always get the master, and it happens. And that gives a sense of spontaneity to the action. And oddly enough, not just an agency to the characters, but in a weird way, an unpredictability to the characters that you don't have nowadays. Nowadays, all of the characters are incredibly predictable because you have the close-ups. The camera jumps to the close-up just before the shot. So you know that the shot is coming. You know that this is the event that's going to happen. And there is an element of I don't know if it's predictability. Yeah, predictability.
It is.
But
And
help me out here. You know what I'm talking about?
yeah, so here's what's because I think there's an even bigger issue at play. that's going on here. What that approach to filmmaking is doing. Not everybody does it, but it happened a lot in New Hollywood. It gives you a sense from the filmmaker's perspective of distancing. By that I simply mean the director isn't there to force your opinion one way or the other, or to force your mind on like a specific narrative that can only go a certain way. It's effectively like the fly on the wall attitude. What's interesting about this from a moral and political perspective is the broader issue that was really at play at this period, which was everybody was operating under a sense of moral ambiguity. By that, I mean the filmmakers, the stories involved, the writers, wherever way you want to go from. Their attitude was, we don't really know what's going on. The best we can do is kind of depict this as honestly as we can. It manifests itself in things like that. There's a potential for spontaneity. You don't know what these characters are going to do. You're kind of just, I'm just here and I'm seeing what happens. Almost a documentary attitude. That's mirrored with this whole, almost like I said, political attitude, which is going on in a number of these movies, which is, we can't really tell you what the heroic position is here.
Right.
You may have some moral attitudes, broadly stroke speaking, but we're not going to really tell you one way or the other what to think. And Joe's a good example of that. So you talked about the ending. Broadly speaking, what Joe is, it's from this period in the early 70s when there was a lot of the pro-Nixon sort of, they call the great silent majority. Well, some of them weren't so silent. They were called the hard hats. Then you had these kind of working class white men, typically men, not only, but mostly, who were just sick and tired of a lot of the hippie movement, the anti-war protests. They felt like their whole world was being spat upon and degraded.
And it was.
And so
we always forget them because after the fact, all these fucking boomers, because they were the baby boomers. They, often as not in our community, they talk about boomers as just older people, but these are actual baby boomers. And these fuckers, retrospectively, are whitewashing history. They were privileged, pampered shitheads who used to spit on working class people and soldiers, looking down on them. They were fucking horrible. But sorry, rant over.
No. That's good context, because that's the case of Joe. Like I said, the plot of Joe is wealthy ad exec's daughter, played by Susan Sarandon, oddly enough, is in this hippie crowd, and her boyfriend's a drug dealer, and he's peddling shit, and she has an overdose on something and has to go to the hospital. Dad comes in and basically confronts this guy. He's like, "What are you doing to my daughter?" The guy demeans this man to the point where the man gets so frustrated at this drug pusher that he kills him in a moment of rage, and he flees the scene, trying to disassociate himself from the crime. Walks himself into like a working class bar in the city. They're in New York, and he comes upon the Peter Boyle character, who is a hard hat. He's basically this working class guy who's pissed off at the left-wing world or the liberal world, what have you, and he's talking his shit about hates this and hates that, and he lets the killer, this upper class man, says, "I just killed one of those fucking hippies," after Boyle has expressed desire to do it, and they bond over the course of the movie over this. I mean, it's not fake, like, hey, the upper class man is having fun at the expense of Joe here. No, they literally bond. They go on a voyage to even find the missing daughter.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this, like, because eventually Boyle's character, Joe, the titular Joe, gathers up the courage to start shooting the hippies and everything, and that's what you see at the end. It is a dark ending because, spoiler alert, the father, the upper class man, does wind up killing his daughter as a result of this. He doesn't know it, but that's what happens. So on a superficial level, the basic level of the story, yes, you would say, oh, this is a self-destructive impulse. But at the same time, it doesn't tell you that the hippies were the real nice guys and they were just being abused. No, the hippies are assholes in the movie. They're destructive. They thieve. They steal. They denigrate people. There's nothing to like about them. The bonding between these two characters is legitimate. They really do believe in something, and they cut across class barriers as well. They have this shared vision that, they're trying, these kids are trying to fuck us up, and we're not going to stand for it. That ambiguity over saying, hey, look, I can't tell you, or I can't give you a story where I explicitly say like Stanley Kramer would do in the 60s. Like, oh, Judgment at Nuremberg, the Nazis were bad people. Okay, we get it. Guess who's coming to dinner? Well, interracial love is okay. Okay, we get it. Inherit the Wind. Oh, you should, be able to, free thought about whatever taboo subjects. Okay, Stanley, we get it. Stanley Kramer is the anathema to this type of Hollywood filmmaking. And I think Joe's the anti-Stanley Kramer movie in a lot of ways, because it provides this complexity of what's going on and says, I can't really tell you flat out that Joe is entirely in the wrong. I can say, yeah, the killing people, there's a moral challenge to it.
Yeah, but here's something really interesting. Notice that these filmmakers, okay, yeah, Joe is indie, sort of, New Hollywood. Okay, fine. But they are talking about things of reality of their contemporary society, of actual hippies, and showing that hippies were assholes, okay, which a lot of them were, clearly. Do you see today any filmmaker or TV show that is talking about people today in a realistic sense, in not a Modern Family bullshitty kind of way, of like a PC kind of way, of showing how indolent and pampered and privileged these SJWs are? Do you see any such show? I don't see any.
I do see one such show, and it's funny enough when I mention it, because in a roundabout way, it's related to Joe. It is the recent Cobra Kai revival of the Karate Kid, which is basically, it does an open shit on it. Why the reason I bring that up and why it's interesting, because it's going to tie back as to why this guy, despite me not thinking he's the best filmmaker of all time, is the interesting thorough thread throughout all this is the director of Joe, a guy named John Avildsen. Mm-hmm. Now that name's going to be familiar to you, because a few years after Joe, he directs another dark movie, but it wins an Academy Award for Jack Lemmon called Save the Tiger. Interesting movie. A couple years after that, he does a film you most certainly know, and it's Rocky. And it's a different attitude, because that's the triumphalist American spirit.
But Rocky loses. He loses to Apollo Creed.
He loses the match, but he wins the night.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
And eventually, in the 80s, Joe, in some sense, remakes Rocky again. He makes the Karate Kid.
Yeah, and there he really wins. Okay, because it's actually an interesting progression if you look at it. Because Rocky, the first one, they're working class people, and they don't win. Rocky does not win. Everybody knows that Rocky is just being the sacrificial white guy. Okay, and he gets the shit kicked out of him because he manages to stand up long enough that it's not a total humiliation, but he loses. Now, what's interesting is then after that, then came the Karate Kid, where the guy gets it all, and you're right. The Cobra Kai TV show is flipping the whole script around and showing that the Ralph Macchio character was a dickhead.
Ironically, even though it's fresh in its own way, Cobra Kai is a shift back to that ambiguity that you got in these early 70s. It feels like a 70s program in a really twisted way, even though it's 80s nostalgia. The techniques and the attitude toward the filmmaking feels more, like I said, ironically more like this period.
Yeah, it's like I want TV shows that have the realism of the new Hollywood, because I think that retrospectively, I look at a picture like Joe, I look at a picture like The French Connection, all of these great early new Hollywood pictures. Let's call them out. Which ones were the great ones? The ones that you look back and you say, this was something. There was Easy Rider, because historically, and also because they were practically like shooting a documentary. It was a traveling documentary with some fictitious scenes thrown in, right? Because they were actually traveling. Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson and the rest of the crew, they were literally traveling around the country and filming shit on the spot, right? They were stealing from
the film
Medium
expression.
Cool.
The film expression I think they used is shoot the rodeo.
Yeah.
They like Mardi Gras was going on. Fucking film Mardi Gras. We're suddenly at Mardi Gras. So be it.
Yeah, and what happens is that you look at the pictures, and Medium Cool is an actual documentary, but Easy Rider feels documentary-like. It feels immediate in a way that pictures today certainly don't. Pictures today are overproduced. And it's so weird because they are severely overproduced, considering the fact that the technology today makes it viable for you to be shooting an entire feature-length picture on a fucking iPhone, which is actually what Steven Soderbergh is doing as an experiment. He's going to be putting that picture out in a little while. It's so fucking weird to see his crew just using an iPhone to get the
Right.
shots, right? But it's possible because the technology is such, it's so easy to shoot, right? So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the pictures at that time seemed, I mean, they portray a reality. The people who were watching it at that time could look at the picture, could look at the French Connection, they could look at whatever, and they say, that's real. That's what's going on now, okay? Whereas the pictures that we're watching, well, they're superhero movies. That's the spectacle that we're being inflicted with right now, and that's going to fade because it's looking like the Star Wars franchise is going to be one that blows the whole thing over because they're fucking it up righteously. But
Well, all we really get right now are fantasies of various kinds. Either we get fantasies that are explicit, a man with a cape can fly and punch people,
yeah,
or fantasies that are more nefarious, which are, like, oh, every life's a beautiful little image and we all just need to get to know each other. And while we're at it, let's fuck a fish.
which one's that?
Fucking a fish is the Shape of Water, which was the film that
Oh,
won.
I didn't even see that
Yeah.
that thing.
Yeah, spoiler alert, the main hero or the main woman in the narrative fucks the fish. Sorry. I didn't mean to ruin it for you. You
Oh.
could kind of get where it was going with the gill flapping, couldn't you?
Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! Anyway,
But that's it. That kind of fantasy, and that was the point of this period, which was, even though part of me is just viscerally says there's something about realism and the fetish of realism I don't like. The realism you get here, and for reasons we can get into or not, are it's just more compelling. Partly because it's the freshness of depicting shit that no one really talks about or no one wants to talk about, like MASH. I think is also a great movie. That's
I
a
hate
Robert
it,
Altman
by the way.
film.
I hate it on a moral level. I think it's a film that glorifies bullies. That's my thing
It's
on MASH.
it's well, funny enough that that's your attitude, because that was the attitude I had with my little SJW inspired college class when we showed it in our dorm.
Mm-hmm.
MASH, and everybody had the attitude of how cruel they were to Hot Lips Houlihan. So Hot Lips Houlihan is a stuck-up army nurse who's by the books. Basically, you straighten up or fly right, and these doctors who are pulled in, I think Tom Skerritt and was it Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould,
Right.
are it's like lighten up. And so they fuck with her by basically, while she's showering, like exposes her nudity to the rest of the camp for a laugh. Everybody took the whole, how could they be so cruel to women?
Yeah, I know.
attitude.
It's so self-righteous because that wasn't the thing for me. The thing for me was the Robert Duvall character. Okay.
Oh, I get, so my attitude about that, because I do retrospect have mixed feelings about that. So Robert Duvall is a doctor who's religious, and I feel like they use his religion against him. But
Yeah.
that's really not the main thing that is defining that Robert Duvall character. The thing that I think made what the abuses they do to Robert Duvall, who basically his character gets taken out in a straitjacket by the time they're done with him because they break him that much. The thing that justifies what the cruelty they do to Robert Duvall in that movie is, whenever he loses a patient, he'll blame other people. And like there's this, like one of the doctor's assistants, Bud Cort, little Bud Cort, is in there, and Robert Duvall loses a patient, and he basically says it's because you fucked up that this guy's dead, and the little kid doesn't know what the fuck's going on, so he basically loses it. And Elliot Gould says, no, fuck you for doing that, you deserve everything that comes your way. And I get that, he deserves it for that, but I don't like the fact that they try to say, well, it's because he's religious too, so we're gonna shit on that element of it. I get that.
There was the element that I had that they sort of like tacked that on because like a truly religious guy like that would, with that attitude, he would not be blaming the kid. He
Exactly.
He would have taken the attitude of like, kid, you were here, you were attending him. This was not about you. It was about his time, the patient's time to die. The wounds were irrecoverable. That character, if it had been portrayed honestly, would have been a much more compassionate guy. Because I've met religious people, okay? And yeah, some of them, the Jesus humping and all that shit is fucking boring sometimes, right? But they are not the kind of people who are going to be blaming others for things that they would justifiably say it was God's will for this to happen. Okay, like the case of a patient dying on a doctor in a fucking battlefield. The patient has a hole in his chest and he passes away. He would never in his right mind blame the little orderly. Okay. And so it was the filmmakers are trying to set him up. That's how I felt, that they were trying to set him up
No, no,
so they could bully
yeah.
him and break him and see, oh, look how cool we are. Because they were the cool hippies. That's the thing that I hated about MASH. That the Donald Sutherland, Tom Skerritt, and the Elliot Gould character were the cool hippies, okay? And they weren't cool. They were fucking bullies. That's what I thought they were.
Yeah, so that like I said, the reason I don't have that attitude is just given the specific situations of that. But I agree. I get where you're coming from with the Robert Duvall. I do think if he were truly religious, he would have been much more empathetic to the people around him. But I justify that by saying, oh, he's probably just some fucking evangelical. They're not really
I think
our kind of Christian.
Yeah, my problem with a lot of the new Hollywood pictures, the early ones at least, is that there seems to be a glorification of the hippie bully, okay? And not enough of the. Okay, like for instance, Joe. Joe is not a picture that I had heard anything about. For me, it was just like, not even an obscure picture. It was an unknown picture until you brought it up. And I was really happy to see it that the fucking hippies were assholes, right? But for the most part, New Hollywood tended to glorify the hippies. I mean, look at Easy Rider. The hippies are the cool guys.
Right.
The hippies are the ones you want to hang out with,
Right, but for MASH, I'll give it this. I don't think it was as much that they were hippies because they are hippies,
No,
but
they
they're
were
not
hippies.
hippies because remember, MASH is the Korean War; it's not the Vietnam War. But the thing is, Altman wanted you to think it was Vietnam.
It was Vietnam.
Yeah, so there's that. But needless to say, I always took that as more of an anti-authoritarian guys having fun, like their little MASH crew. These guys, they didn't respect authority. They had their own thing going, but the thing is, they were good at what they did, and they said they basically are. Our expertise in being doctors means don't fuck with us. That was the attitude I kind of got.
That's the other thing that bothered me. See, hippies, for the most part, eschewed competence. They weren't competent people. They looked down on it. They looked down on the people who were tryhards. They laughed at people with pocket protectors. They laughed at the people. They thought it was all about attitude and being cool. They didn't respect actual craft, because craft, real craft, real ability at anything takes an enormous amount of time and discipline. And for me, the hippies were all just a bunch of indolent, children of rich people who got away with everything and got to do whatever the fuck they wanted and didn't have to pay the consequences. I mean, I fucking despise hippies, as you can tell.
Well, no, I do too, and that's why I think MASH is different because these guys actually know what they're doing. And I'll give you another example of that anti-authoritarian attitude, but which is from a different perspective, which I also think is a great classic of this period, Dirty Harry. Now, Dirty Harry is
but it's not New Hollywood.
Oh, that's New Hollywood. That's totally New Hollywood.
You think?
John Milius and
oh yeah, I forgot.
And Michael Cimino were the writers on the first two films. And yeah,
no,
Don
wait.
Siegel.
Michael Cimino was not a writer on Dirty
on the
Harry.
second one. On the second one, he was. On Magnum Force, he was.
Michael Cimino. I'm looking it up as we speak because Cimino wrote Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Great fucking script. Great script. God damn, that was a great fucking script. That for me, for example, was one of the great. It was really a studio picture, but it was like because when was Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, like 72, right? So it's.
I actually think it's 74, but let me check that. Now I need to know. It's got to know, to quote from.
You're right. You're right. I hadn't realized that it was John Milius and Michael Cimino did Magnum Force. Yeah. That was a fun picture. Well, Dirty Harry was just cool. Yeah.
So Dirty Harry. Remember, Dirty Harry is a cop who is the bad cop. All of the 70s, like you're a loose cannon, you son of a bitch. That's from Dirty Harry. So the premise of Dirty Harry is it's actually interesting in retrospect. I don't think unless you've watched it, you may not know. They took the Zodiac killer crimes and reproduced them. And Dirty Harry is the San Francisco cop tracking down the Zodiac killer with another Star Trek reference. It is The actor who plays Zodiac is, oh shit, I've forgotten his name
Yeah,
already.
but actually, Dirty Harry is based on the policeman who would be portrayed by what's his name, Mark Ruffalo in Zodiac, the
Exactly,
David Fincher picture. Yeah, and he
exactly.
was a real cop, and he was, of course, not a loose cannon. He was a very diligent cop. He just had long hair.
Exactly, and Bullet is also based on him as well. And I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
and I think vaguely you get Columbo at it. Andy Robinson, for those Star Trek fans, he's Garrick from Deep Space Nine, the
I
Cardassian.
have no idea who you're talking
But
about.
it doesn't
Okay,
matter whether you know or not.
it's
Fucking
important that you
boomer.
know.
It's important that I know and the audience knows. They took the Zodiac crimes and have Harry Callahan, who's a cop who's willing to bend the rules because they're necessary in order to achieve the better outcome, which is find this guy and stop him. Now, it was funny at the time, Pauline Kael, a well-known film critic for The New Yorker, basically said this is a fascist film. I think she said it was a great work of fascist art, but a work of fascist art nonetheless,
She's
because
fundamentally right.
the attitude, yeah, and I don't even think that's a negative criticism, but that's neither here nor there. Basically, the attitude that Milius had described, which is a good summary of it, which is we don't need the law to tell us what is right and wrong. We inherently know what is right and wrong, and Harry operates on that, and Harry has to operate on that because it's the only way that they will succeed. Because this movie it's a fucking punch to the gut to all sort of liberal progressive attitudes of the rights of the accused and police brutality, this, that, and the other. Harry is not a bad man. Harry just is his own man, and he knows what to do, and he will do whatever means are necessary in order to succeed. And he is an anti-authoritarian figure, but an anti-authoritarian from the right-wing perspective. He's almost like Judge Dredd, if you want to reference a later comic, which is he is in the he is granted, whether we want to or not, the power necessary to resolve this significant moral problem. And the film doesn't hide from the fact that there's a challenge to this. That there is it's not a perfect situation, but it's probably better than what the going by the book would be.
Well, okay, I think we're losing a little bit track of what we're trying to argue here insofar as this first thing about New Hollywood, because we're starting to argue or debate specific pictures, and the moral framework of the specific pictures. And I think it's more interesting to look at it and take a step back and sort of like see the overarching direction of all of these pictures. And I think that there are a few things that we can.
But that's why we're going through the specifics of these, because these are the representative ones on this moral ambiguity.
Well,
Going through the specifics of Dirty Harry is actually going to give you what Hollywood's doing overall.
yeah, okay, no. So I think that there are a few things that we can say right off the bat about New Hollywood that we can just sort of like start writing out the main elements. And I think that the first one is, of course, a realism, a feeling of immediacy. And also, because they're shooting on actual locations, and the reason they're shooting on actual locations is that you don't have to spend money on a location. You don't have to spend money on studios. You just shoot it. Whatever's there, you just shoot it. And you can compare this to Patton. Patton is 1970 Best Picture. Great picture, great performance. One of the most historically accurate war movies made, actually. And the whole thing was shot on a studio. Very few actual locations, except, of course, the actual battles where you see the actual tanks and stuff like that. But, like, for instance, all of the interiors, they're all shot on a set. And it feels artificial. It feels like a set. Whereas everything in New Hollywood was shot on an actual location. Like the shooting at the end of Joe, it was clearly shot in an actual New England house or a Massachusetts house or wherever that was shot, right? You
Right.
feel the location in a way that when you look at some of the locations in Patton, they're supposed to be in like some forward base, and it's so clear that the walls are made of plywood that have been painted by a set decorator, and carefully and lovingly made to look like the interior of some semi-bombed out place. And it's not real.
Cheap walls and even lighting.
Yeah.
Cheap walls, even lighting.
Cheap walls and even lighting, right? And the new Hollywood is making a virtue out of a lack. They don't have the money to make a studio, so they'll shoot in a real location, so it'll feel much more immediate, right? Which is basically what the new Italian, the post-war Italian cinema, what's it called? Of
Neorealism.
Neorealism, right? The Bicycle Thief and all that. Roberto Rossellini. what they were doing. They were using a literally bombed out country to shoot scenes and it felt real. Okay, that is one of the things that New Hollywood is doing, bringing neorealism to America. But what's interesting is that retrospectively, not many of the new wave cinema made it to the classics of Hollywood, of New Hollywood. I mean, can you think of like any clearly? Okay, we have a few pictures like Medium Cool that is so Godardian, so new wave, right? I mean, the fucking thing could have been spoken in French and would have fit right in, right? But Medium Cool is famous because it's a documentary and because of what's his name, the cinematographer did it, right?
Haskell Wexler. It's actually half a documentary.
Yeah.
Half of it's narrative, half of it is the Chicago Convention.
Right, but be that as it may, the point I'm trying to make here is that, see, that kind of formal experimentation aged very poorly, whereas the realism aged very well. You see what I'm trying to say? Like those super zoom ins that they would do, or zoom outs, those look cheesy, right? I mean, the new wave shit that New Hollywood did aged badly, but the neorealism shit that they integrated because of expense, because they were trying to keep it at a minimum, that came across very well. And that's interesting that they basically, the best pictures of New Hollywood, of the early ones especially, and that leads us to the pinnacle of them, merged the neorealism, sort of like eschewed what you call it, new wave, and yet integrated the moral ambiguity of new wave, like Breathless, for instance. The picture that the moral ambiguity, the anti-hero, Breathless is all over New Hollywood, but not the technique of it. They used Hollywood technique with the moral ambiguity of new wave and the actuality, the immediacy of Italian neorealism. That's my thinking as to what New Hollywood is.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is true. I think what I would phrase, the way I think of it is, they took the realistic elements of it. I won't say realism in the sense of the ideology behind it. The ideology behind realism was heavily socialistic and whatnot. That really didn't play into it. But they took depict things to as much extent as possible, as realistically as possible. But we're going to do something interesting. We're going to fuse that with one of Hollywood's best traditions, which is narrative filmmaking to a certain extent. That emotional, visceral aspect of it, which is artificial and in some sense can be operatic. And I'm going to create something that's simultaneously exists in both worlds. The elevated and the like shit on the ground. And arguably one of the why I say it's the pinnacle of the earliest period, because you see it happening in the film, is The Godfather. What's interesting about The Godfather, because it started out as an idea very much along the cheapness of Easy Rider. It's like they wanted to film it in contemporary Kansas City. They wanted The Godfather to be in the fucking Kansas City in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And eventually, smarter heads prevailed. It's an argument about which guy made the right decision.
It's not that. It's that the book became a bigger bestseller. See, exactly. you have to know the history of the book and its publishing history to understand the evolution of the picture. Because originally the picture, the book rather, The Godfather, it was just a pulp novel. Okay, it was just one more. It was fairly large. It was much larger than the average pulp novel. But it was just an ordinary commercial pulpy kind of book. And what happened was that it clicked in a way that other books like it had never had, because it was the first one that actually talked about the Italian culture, the Italian subculture of the immigrant subculture, which Mario Puzo knew very, very well. Keep in mind, Mario Puzo was very desperate to make a lot of money off of this book. And he was, at the time, as I understand it, he was a little bit blocked, and so he wasn't really sure what to draw on. So he started drawing on his own experiences growing up in the Lower East Side, because he was a Lower East Side Italian immigrant kid, and a lot of the stories he had heard about Frank Sinatra and other people, he started integrating into this book, and the book took off because I don't know if you've read it. I've read it multiple times. It's an extraordinary achievement. I think it's one of the best novels of the 20th century. I'm not kidding, because it has an energy to it, a vitality, a life to it that's extraordinary. You know, I mean, even the dull well, actually, there are no dull passages to the book. It is a page turner, but it's just muscular, okay? And the book took off, okay?
Well, yeah. So regardless of the cause for it, they eventually they just say we're going to make this a bigger film,
Right.
and they're doing interesting things to in the production of it that challenge the idea of like just strict realism in the old sense. For example, I'm going to have a sepia tone in this film to represent that old feel of looking back on the 40s, that golden tone to it. That's not realistic. That's an artificiality of the camera doing that. The story itself is operatic. You're dealing with the arguably the rise, fall, and decay of a family. If you take
Yeah, it's
both
basically the
the
brothers
stories both
Karamazov. Yeah,
parts.
yeah.
Exactly. So you add that into it. The richness of the music and everything, and you mirror that with the specific observations of a guy who lived the Italian immigrant life. So Coppola, it's like with this at the wedding. I mean, my uncle
Yeah,
by marriage is Sicilian.
it's really interesting because
I
they were shooting the picture, right? They shot it more or less in sequence, and like you look at the beginning of the picture, and you have the wedding sequence, right? And that is classic new cinema in terms of realism, because Coppola set up an actual wedding, an actual Italian wedding, a rich Italian person's wedding, but the band, the food, everything was what he had remembered when he was growing up and what Mario Puzo remembered growing up. And that's what they shot, and they shot it in a realistic way because it's shot outdoors, shot with natural light. They didn't have artificial light. They just had screens and bouncers, right, to bounce the light to make it evenly lit. But it was all natural, and you can tell you can tell. And Gordon Willis, shit, man, he was a fucking genius in that picture.
But what's interesting about that is it's set against the opposite, which is that scene before you get to the wedding, the scene that starts it, the I Believe in
Oh yeah,
America. It's very stylized and shadowed that you have literally only the head of the Undertaker speaking, and eventually you reveal the office and everything. That is a mood piece in terms of lit constructed, and the narrative moves forward. So you are getting the two elements simultaneously, and it's not cacophonous. I know that's a sound term, but it's you get what I'm kind of saying. They don't create dissonance between each other. They really reinforce each other. You have that element and both strengthen each other piece of it, and that's why it's almost, and you will see this in the Hollywood films coming after this, which is a better understanding and utilization of that unison of, like I said, the realistic elements with the, hey, we actually are a film and we're going to use the artificiality of the film to our
yeah.
advantages.
But what's interesting about The Godfather, for instance, is that see Coppola, he said at the time and subsequently that he was aiming for a classic Hollywood picture. There are no handheld shots in The Godfather. Look at it. There is everything is locked down. Everything is dollied. Everything is a tracking shot. There's nothing handheld. Okay, formally, it's a classic Hollywood picture of the 30s and 40s. Formally. Okay. Yeah. Of course, there's a sepia tone which didn't exist in the 30s and 40s because that was Gordon Willis, and Gordon Willis did a whole lot of other things in the picture, just as Marlon Brando did a whole lot of things in that picture, and everybody was at their best in that picture. Okay. I mean, and shit, everybody who was anybody in New Hollywood wound up working on that goddamn picture because George Lucas and Marcia Lucas were on the editing staff. I don't know if they were the actual editors, but they certainly were on the editing staff.
Yeah, they must. I don't think they got a credit for it, but they probably. I mean, because this is they were all working for Francis's company, American Zoetrope, at the time. So yeah, everybody. And this was the thing that was to the credit of New Hollywood, was that the little cliques of directors were very comfortable helping each other out with their films. For example, Godfather. The best scene in The Godfather is the speech in the garden. Like I wanted you to be the one pulling the strings. Wasn't enough time. Coppola, who wrote every other bit of the script, did not write that scene. He couldn't get it right. Robert Town, the guy we just talked about from The Last Detail, with I am the motherfucking short patrol motherfucker. He wrote that scene. And when it's fully acknowledged, even when Francis got his Oscar, yeah, he wrote that scene. That collaborative mentality was very strong. It's like it was almost like a guild
Yeah.
attitude.
Yeah, it was
They
sort of
were
like
they
the
were
cool
technically part of the guild.
kids. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that clearly Coppola was at, if not the center, he was very close to the center because he encouraged that cool kids mentality. And it's very interesting. If you've ever seen Coppola, especially documentaries of Coppola when he was young and doing those pictures, he was the fat kid. He was the fat kid who probably in high school got the shit kicked out of him, and he was like artsy and brainy, and so he got the shit kicked out of him even more. And finally, he gets to a place where he's one of the cool kids, and he creates this nucleus because American Zoetrope is clearly the other strong nucleus of New Hollywood. I mean, there's Corman and there's BBS, but there's also Zoetrope because I mean, who was there at Zoetrope? There was George Lucas, and Marshall Lucas. There was John Milius. There was Caleb Deschanel, great cinematographer. Anybody seen The Black Stallion?
Yep.
And Black Stallion also, another New Hollywood picture. I honestly think that The Black Stallion is one of the most beautiful and memorable pictures ever made. I mean, it's just so gorgeous, and just so, I love it. And I think I consider it a New Hollywood picture, but we'll talk about it later. But the point I'm trying to make is that it was this little clique. And all these guys, they were all working together, all in each other's back pocket, right? And, like George Lucas was on the set of The Godfather, and he had a little Polaroid where he was taking shots. I'm thinking of The Rain People. That was the one before. Because George Lucas was on the set of Rain People, and he was using a Polaroid to come up with compositions for the shots while they were shooting. I mean, it was really a collaborative thing that I don't think that you're ever going to see that again. And I think it had to do with such low stakes. And I think
exactly.
And I think that Godfather was the tipping point. That's when all of a sudden people realized, holy shit, we can make a lot of money off of this shit. Because it was a huge success.
Exactly, because that you're right to call it a tipping point. Because after that point, you get the bigger budgets coming in, and even if it's not bigger budgets, you're willing to have even bigger visions.
Yeah, more operatic. More operatic.
And that'll be the next episode. More operatic. That'll definitely be the next episode, I think, is where we're going to focus on that. But what's interesting at this period overall, if I were to sum it up in one statement even, I would say this. Preceding it, and this is not a statement of saying there is no artistic Hollywood films before this. That would be a lie. There are artistic films. But I would say the attitude before was, we're good craftsmen. We are going to make a good functioning film that does what you need it to do, and you go forward from that. This generation, in this period, said we're intentionally making art. That is my. I think so. No, I think so.
No, hang on. I disagree a little bit there because I think it's a different kind of art. Okay, because I think that what's happening is that pre New Hollywood, the people making pictures were making great pictures. I mean, like John Ford pictures, like The Searchers, for instance. That's great art. And to deny it is just ridiculous.
I never did.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that you are, but what I'm saying is it's obviously great art. And there are a lot of other pictures that were also great art. Citizen Kane, Gone with the Wind, list goes on. But the thing is, see, before New Hollywood, it was not that it was impersonal. It was rather that it was the artists wondering or trying to figure out what the audience would like. Whereas with New Hollywood, it was sort of like, okay, I'm going to do what I like because the financial stakes are so low. I can get away with following my vision as opposed to trying to figure out what people are going to like and attaching my vision to it.
Well, that's why I phrased it the way I did, because if previously you still have, it's almost improprietous if you were to say, "Oh, I'm an artist." John, if you tried to say, "Hey, John Ford, what do you think about your art?" He'd tell you to go fuck yourself.
Well, no, he famously said, he famously said, John Ford, as a matter of fact, he famously, at some meeting, he said, "I'm John Ford and I make Westerns." That's how he considered himself, and that's what Peter Bogdanovich was sort of like shocked. He says, like, "John Ford, you're an artist," and he's like, "No, I make Westerns." Which I find that attitude, I find it a better attitude for an artist, to tell you the truth, okay? I personally respect that more because he's coming from a craft angle. He does not view his point of view as so superior to everybody else's. He's not arrogant. Whereas I think that the new Hollywood kids, at first, they were just trying out new shit. But then they started buying their own brand and they became arrogant shitheads. And we got what we got, which is, Heaven's Gate and all the rest of it. You see where I'm going?
Well, that's what's going to be well, that's why I phrased it that way, because I intentionally know the arc of this series.
Yeah, it's kind of horrifying.
And that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually going to watch Heaven's Gate again, or at least skim through it, because I haven't seen it in a while. And which version do we have to watch? Because I know that there are all kinds.
Oh, you're going to watch the long version. Well, it's a very quick 4 hours.
It's a very quick 4 hours. Yeah. Oh man, good God. But yeah.
Well, I like that movie, so you're going to have to put up with me being nice to it.
Well, it's that the thing is,
I will put up with you not being nice to it.
I think that Heaven's Gate. Okay, just a little prelude of my thinking is, it's an incredibly beautifully shot picture. I mean, it's just gorgeous. Okay, it is incoherent. It is just mental vomit. Okay, a very expensive mental vomit. Some of the images are untouchable in terms of beauty. Okay, I mean, there's that the scene of Sam Waterston with his guys that they're going to go out and kill people, and they're standing in the dark and their weapons shining and the lights shining, and that was shot practically. No special effects; they didn't exist at the time. No computer generated imagery. And on top of that, it wasn't even like they had good video monitoring. Okay, it's shockingly beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful images ever. Like the train arriving at the town and the sepia tone of it when they're all dancing in that barnyard that time. Or no, I mean, excuse me, roller skating. It was just so extraordinary. Even when they're doing that idiotic dance that they're waltzing at Oxford Garden, in Oxford University, which is supposed to be a stand-in for Harvard. It was just kind of ridiculous, right? All of it. I thought it was just one of the most beautiful pictures ever made. But it is completely incoherent. It is put completely in the grasp of somebody's, not just pride, but ego, their psychosis of self-idolatry. Okay.
Well, that's the official narrative, and what we will see.
Sometimes the official narrative is true. Sometimes
it's officially the lie agreed upon.
Oh, what do you think?
But I would say Heaven's Gate is a movie that will take its leisurely time to tell a simple story, but it is effective. And
okay, well, what about One from the Heart? That's another disaster of New Hollywood that ended Coppola's freedom, which I think that hurt him more than anything. It's not that it hurt his career; it ended his ability to do whatever the fuck he wanted. And One from the Heart. What was that? That was just a fucking disaster. That was again.
Well, I'm not going to defend One from the Heart,
or One Through the Heart, as they called it.
One Through the Heart. That the fact that they said that's clearly then where Coppola got his idea for Dracula, isn't it?
Oh, who knows? But no. I thought that Dracula was a studio picture, and he got the assignment. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to make here is that the artistic vision that these guys had of tits and ass, dirty words, and morally interesting problems and anti-heroes. It was interesting, and the way that they formally combined certain elements of Italian neorealism and French New Wave themes and classic Hollywood composition. Yeah, I think that we can agree that its culmination was The Godfather, because you got great tits in what was the name of the character, Apollonia.
Apollonia.
Yeah, there was great violence. When they shot Sterling Hayden, that was a great killing.
Oh no, it was great. You think Sterling Hayden? What about Dear Sonny?
Oh yeah, I'd forgotten.
That's the peak of the violence.
Well, no, that was
or
just,
the final,
was just Bonnie and Clyde.
Baptism.
That was just Bonnie and Clyde, Ray Dew, right? Well, Bonnie and Clyde. Let's talk about that. That's a picture that we haven't talked about. That was Hollywood Studios' first attempt to do New Hollywood. I mean, you would agree, wouldn't you? I mean, because Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, Warren Beatty, who was the producer of that picture, I believe, he was a creature of the studios, right? And he was the one who realized that the new Hollywood aesthetic could be brought into the studio, and he brought it in via Bonnie and Clyde, because Bonnie and Clyde was a studio picture.
Well, Bonnie and Clyde, I think, even predates Easy Rider, actually. Bonnie and Clyde, along with The Graduate, are early attempts by the studio to try to say, hey, there's probably something a little chaotic that we could do as
Yeah.
opposed to our safer films, and we'll experiment with them. And they were both successful.
Yeah, it was 67. Actually, yeah, I hadn't realized it. It was 67. Man, yeah. And
And I think 67 is also the year of The Graduate, I think, right? I think.
I'm looking at.
Don't worry. We'll have our,
No, but I mean, yeah, 67. And when was Easy Rider?
69.
Really?
Yeah. Because Hollywood they did have in the late 60s a couple of like these early attempts to do eccentric things. I think Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice may also be 69 or 68. I could be wrong on that.
So okay, so it sort of like brings our whole thesis. Well, it doesn't really bring our thesis apart because, Bonnie and Clyde.
Those are all cheap little experiment movies.
Well, I don't think that
at the end of the day, yeah, they're made by the studio.
But yeah, I don't think Bonnie and Clyde was a cheap little movie.
Let me see what the budget was. Now I'm looking it up.
Yeah, no, I think that no, it wouldn't have been.
$2.5 million.
That was a lot.
And it made 70. So
that was a lot of money.
That's not that much.
No, because you're thinking today's budgets at that time, $2.5 million.
No, even then,
Cleopatra broke the studio, and it was only 20 million. Okay, think of it in those terms. Cleopatra was 63, it was 20 million, and they went broke over it, right? Okay, what's her name? Liz Taylor at that time was getting.
So it's 10%, and it's Warner Brothers Picture, which has a much bigger and better balance sheet at the time.
Yeah, but think of it in these terms. Elizabeth Taylor was being paid $1 million a film, right? And that's equivalent to a big star today, like I don't know what's her name, Jennifer Lawrence. I think she got like 12 million for Passengers, and she's like a bigger star, and 12 million is not that out of line. So you could say that, okay, twice Elizabeth Taylor's salary, 2.5 times Elizabeth Taylor's salary was the budget for Bonnie and Clyde. 2.5 times Jennifer Lawrence's salary of 12 million. What's that? That's 40 million bucks. It wasn't a cheapy film. It wasn't the top of the line picture, but it was a studio picture. Okay. It's sort of like undercutting our own theme, our own thesis.
No, I don't think so. Because like that's even less money that was spent on The Graduate. I'm looking at the other big movies of this year. So okay, that made big money. The Dirty Dozen. So that's a bigger picture. That's 5.4 million right there. So that's less than half, less than half.
Yeah, but that would be the equivalent of 100 million.
You only live twice. The Big Bond movie is 10.3 million. This isn't an excessive amount of money. I don't think so.
You only live twice was $10 million, right? And the current Bond pictures are running about 200 million, right? So basically, Bonnie and Clyde was a quarter of a Bond picture. A quarter of a current Bond picture is about 50 million bucks. So yeah, it was about like 30 to 50 million of today's money. It wasn't a cheap picture. It wasn't a throwaway. It was enough that it was not an excessive financial risk, but it was a potential of financial risk. Okay, and well, nowadays you cannot make a movie for $30 million because it's too dangerous financially.
Right, and well, I don't even think it really challenges what we're doing here. Where they're saying like, look, Hollywood's experimenting in a way with these films as cheaply as they could do it. So then how do they take it to the next level? They outsource it, and they take it to an even another level. Because frankly, Easy Rider is even more crazy than Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde still is fundamentally operating on.
But then
structures.
Shouldn't we revamp our thesis and say that Bonnie and Clyde was the first real new Hollywood movie? And not...
I don't think it's fully new Hollywood, though.
Cwhy not? I mean,
it's close.
It's
close.
all over the
it's
place
close.
insofar as French New Wave cinematography and formal experimentation, like zooms and shit like that, right?
Well, the thing, arguably, then, if you want to be that strict about it, then even Lawrence of Arabia is, because Lawrence of Arabia does jump cuts and all of the other Godard techniques.
Yeah, but it integrates Godardian techniques. but it's still a studio picture. Clearly, I mean, like for instance, the interiors are all in a studio, shot in a studio.
Same thing with Bonnie and Clyde. Same. That's my attitude on it. Is it close to New Hollywood? Is it a precursor to New Hollywood? Yes. Same thing with The Graduate. It's a precursor, but it's not fully into that. True, ambiguous situation. A little. It's playing a little bit.
Isn't it weird?
But it's still
how
operating.
The Graduate aged so badly.
I don't think it aged that much. I'll put it this way: it is clearly of its time because of the music and because it's been so associated with. This is like the movie of this. The '60s youth gravitated to this movie for whatever reason. So I think it's dated that way. But in terms of the resonance of the film, no, I think it actually holds up. It's interesting.
Which ones for you of this early period are the ones that really just stood the test of time? They're like, yeah, this is it. This was really high points. Okay, The Godfather 1. I personally think that Godfather 2 is almost superior. Yeah, but okay, that's another question.
So of this early period, so let's say if The Godfather is going to be like the stopping point, because there's going to be movies that I think stand the test of time afterwards.
Sure.
But let's stop at 72.
Yeah.
French Connection
Definitely
holds up. Dirty Harry holds up. I would say Joe isn't a great movie, but it's memorable. For me, MASH holds up. The Graduate will hold up. Easy Rider, not so much. I can't. Do you consider Cabaret a new Hollywood movie? I don't.
No, I don't.
But I kind of do. I kind of do, and I kind of don't.
No.
I mostly don't.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think so. I probably listed the ones that I think are the memorable ones. There's probably others that I'm forgetting.
Oh yeah,
sure.
Tons of movies that I'm forgetting. But I'm doing something simple. I'm going through the list of new Hollywood pictures. Okay, and what would be the representative pictures of that period?
And this is an overrepresentative list. I know what they're throwing in stuff.
Yeah, they're throwing in everything,
like,
right? Because, like, for instance, at the top of the list, they have Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but that was clearly a studio picture that integrated certain elements of French New Wave. I don't see it as new Hollywood.
They also throw in Night of the Living Dead, which had nothing to do with Hollywood whatsoever.
Yeah. They throw in 2001 Space Odyssey. Come on, I mean, get real. Okay, so of like the pictures that are like new Hollywood, Bullet was not new Hollywood. Bullet was a studio picture.
Nor was the Wild Bunch. I know they want it to be, but the Wild Bunch that's a crazier older guy. That is not necessarily new Hollywood. It feels like it, but it's not.
Well, I look at Bullet, for instance, and it's brilliant use of location. Okay, it was one of the first pictures that actually was of the Hollywood studio pictures that were going on location. In San Francisco, and the great chase scene at the end. That was exciting. It was really cool. Okay, so they have MASH, they have Love Story. Love Story wasn't fucking new. That was a studio picture. That was the ultimate studio picture.
Like I said, some of the exactly. Well, like Little Big Man's a studio picture, but I like. There's a lot of movies here I like, but if you're asking about what I think of new Hollywood, I'll be more
yeah, like they're saying that Patton was a new Hollywood picture. That's absurd.
Yeah, it's not. It's really not. Nor is Fiddler on the Roof.
Nor is Zabriskie Point. Yeah,
Zabriskie Point is a foreign film that just happened to be filmed in Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. French.
Clute, I think it's memorable.
Like Last Tango in Paris. Black. Oh man, this list is absurd. We're both looking at the Wikipedia list, and it's just fucking absurd because some of the pictures. Okay, Last Detail. Yeah, sure. Paper Moon.
The Last Picture Show. Yep.
Paper Moon. E.T. the Extraterrestrial is fucking new Hollywood. Oh God, just shoot me now.
Yeah, well, remember,
Tron.
I'm strict. That's a lie. I'm strictly ending at 72. So for that King of Martin Gardens. Yeah.
Let me get to 72. Let's hope that this fucking list has The Godfather, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it has The Godfather. They're not that stupid.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, they're throwing up everything done by Mike Nichols, and Mike Nichols was
pretty much everything filmed in the 70s and
that's memorable.
Outside the 70s is going in this list.
No, it's an absurd list. Okay, like the Poseidon Adventure. Shit, it's a totally different movement. The Poseidon Adventure was the first disaster picture that Hollywood said, hey, we can make a shit ton of money with a disaster. And so they had Earthquake, they had Airplane, and then Airplane 75 and 77 and 79, which all
For
of which
those
I
of you
saw.
who are interested, the producer of those films is a guy named Irwin Allen. Irwin Allen had hitherto been known for making very cheap television programs that literally would take monsters from one program he had, spray paint them a different color, and then have monsters on a different program. What's the Lost in Space is basically his most famous TV show.
Yeah.
That's how. And then he's like, okay, well, I'll make bigger budget movies, and then there we go. I got these big, these these big
Do
hits.
they have
on
the
me.
Paper Chase?
They have the Paper Chase.
What year was the Paper Chase?
I think it's 73.
Yeah, because I think that the Paper Chase, that felt new Hollywood to me. I think it was sort of like morally trivial. It wasn't as it didn't have the, interestingly, it didn't have the moral power that the picture could have had. I think that okay, I have to admit that the Paper Chase is a picture that I really love because I think it was beautifully photographed. I thought that the dichotomy between the characters in the study group was really interesting, how they were clearly delineated and they were clearly different people, and yet how they, sort of like came together. And it's just one of those pictures that I wish that they'd done a better job of it, because I thought it was very well edited. I thought it was beautifully shot by Gordon Willis. Great performances by John Houseman and Timothy Bottoms. And overall, just a lot of really good elements. And the reason I'm expounding on this is that it seems to me that I look at a lot of the pictures here on this list, and a lot of them had all of these really good elements going for them. But it seems to me that relatively few came together. To tell you the truth, the only one I feel that really came together was The Godfather. That where all the elements came together into a unified whole that was greater than the individual pieces. Because you can certainly talk to me about Marlon Brando's performance, Coppola's direction and directorial choices insofar as shots, Gordon Willis, how he lit the thing. You could talk to me about all of that. Each individual performance, the clash between the artificiality of Marlon Brando's performance coupled to the naturalism of Al Pacino's performance, right? Which paid off so brilliantly when Al Pacino shot the Sollozzo and the police captain. I mean, that perfect naturalness that he was embodying compared to and contrasted to the complete artificiality of Marlon Brando's performance, deliberate. It worked beautifully. That picture, all of the individual elements are all brilliant, and yet they all came together for something even bigger. There was true synergy. But I think that that's the only one. I cannot really see here of the pictures that you and I obviously agree on as to which were truly new Hollywood and which were they shouldn't be here. I don't see that in any other picture. I mean, I look at Midnight Cowboy.
I think what's happening is your extreme and obvious love for The Godfather is forcing you to taint everything else unnecessarily. So, to be brutally honest, I think the other pictures are many of the pictures here are strong on the merits and the contract they make with the audience in terms of what they're attempting to do.
I think the only one I can get behind
I don't think Dirty Harry has major flaws in it that I care about.
Oh, come on.
McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Hang on.
It does not have material flaws.
The French Connection is the only other picture that I feel has that going for it, like The Godfather. That all of the individual pieces are brilliant and it does come together for a greater whole. The French Connection. Okay, no, I'm not like falling. They have fucking Clockwork Orange here. What the fuck, man? These guys are high. Whoever wrote this list. Anyway, okay, The French Connection and Badlands.
Well, I think
Badlands. Yeah, I can get behind Badlands. I think that was a great picture.
Yeah, I think there are more great pictures on this list that you're being a little bit too. I think McCabe and Mrs. Miller is perfect. Is a perfect.
I've actually never watched it.
And that's your problem now.
No. I mean, I've never gotten around to it. You know, one of those pictures that
It's good. No, it's a good Western. It's a very good Western. Exceptional Western, to be perfectly honest with you. I certainly would have some. Let me see what else we've got here. I think Harold and Maude is actually, even though I don't like, Joseph Yusef Islam's music per se, I think it's, for what it is attempting to do, I think it perfectly hits it out of the park. Probably the same with Last Picture Show, if I'm going to be nice. Deliverance, yeah, absolutely hitting it out of the park. There's plenty on here. There's quite a bit. Last Tango in Paris isn't really. It's an exceptional movie, but it's not New Hollywood. It's a European.
Yeah,
film.
it's a European art house. Well, it's a European picture trying to be a Hollywood picture. Yeah, Last Tango in Paris was actually pretty damn good. Actually, yeah, I really liked Lando.
And part of the thing here that I would also stress for this early period that I keep in mind is, because these are earlier film attempts by some of these directors, the roughness of the film is a qualitatively positive element that you can't strip away from it. In other words, Five's Easy Pieces and Easy Rider, are they perfectly executed in their way? No, but if I made them perfectly executed, like The Godfather, they wouldn't be their kind of movies. You would lose a lot of the charm from it. So you have to keep it in mind, particularly for this earlier period. Later period, because afterwards there are even more that I think are particularly strong. But The Godfather, like I said, because it's the turning point where you actually you are emphasizing the exceptional craftsman and unison of the elements we're saying are going into it. So you're actually going to see a lot more movies afterwards, like from 73 through, arguably the late 70s, that are going to be at that comparable level. I'll say right away, I think Chinatown's at that level, absolutely.
Yeah, Chinatown, that was another great picture. That was truly a great picture.
Yeah, I'd say The Exorcist as well is absolutely at that level. But I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves too much right now. But
because what year was Chinatown?
74.
Yeah, no, because Chinatown, God, that was a fucking brilliant movie, and about fucking water rights. I mean, think how absurd it was to make a movie about water rights. That is just brilliant writing. That is just taking a potentially trivial topic or something that's just so, on the one hand, banal and just on its surface devoid of drama, and making it so brilliant. And that was just, fucking good. Yeah, that was a good picture. And everything on, Chinatown, another classic. But okay, we're outside of the period. And Roman,
but needless to say, we're giving a little tease of part two, which I think we're going to raise the stakes on this one. Part two is when even bigger fish get fried, as it were.
Yeah. So this is the end of part one of New Hollywood. Benway, you want to take it out?
Ladies and gentlemen, have a good time watching these movies. It may seem like a chore or homework to do all of this movie watching to keep up with us, but I guarantee you're going to be happier watching these than not. So this is a eat your vegetables, because they're really candy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of times, the pictures we're shitting on, right? Like I was shitting all over MASH, right? It's a fun picture. It's worth watching. It's worth watching, and it is very funny in ways that movies today are just fucking not funny. Movies today are just so unfunny compared to some of these pictures. Even the ones that are dramatic, they have funnier jokes than the current comedies that are just stupid, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about comedy and comedic elements in the second episode, because that's something I think that
we will.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Coach Red Pill for Dr. Benway and myself. This has been the Coach and Benway podcast. Take it easy, and we will see you next time.